Welcome to Fluent Podcasts. Great to have you with us. This is part of our Learn English with Podcasts playlist. And today we're really getting into a topic that, well, I think touches almost everyone, often without us even quite realizing the extent of it. We're talking about how to manage and maybe even, stop overthinking.
Yes,
Yeah.
overthinking.
Yeah. Have you ever had one of those nights, it's like 3 a.m., you're just staring at the ceiling, and your mind is absolutely caught in this loop that just won't quit?
hmm
Maybe you're replaying some awkward thing you said, like
Oh.
years ago, picking apart every single word, every little gesture, totally convinced you sounded like an idiot.
Oh, absolutely. Or maybe you're spiraling into all those what ifs,
Yeah.
imagining every single catastrophic way tomorrow could just completely unravel.
Right. Even though logically, deep down, you probably know it's pretty unlikely.
It's that feeling, isn't it, where your brain just will not switch off. Or another classic, you send a text message, maybe to a friend or someone important, and there's no reply. An hour goes by. Silence. And instead of just thinking, oh, they're probably busy or maybe their phone's off, your mind instantly leaps
Yeah, straight to the worst.
straight to the worst possible conclusion. They hate me. I definitely said something wrong. I've ruined everything.
Yeah, that rapid slide into really disproportionate worry, that's a classic sign.
Exactly. It's almost like our brains have this, I don't know, this incredible, almost mischievous talent for taking the absolute tiniest little spark, something insignificant, and just fanning it into this roaring inferno of drama.
Hmm.
And overthinking, it isn't just mentally tiring, it's profoundly inefficient, isn't it? It really feels like you're running on an emotional hamster wheel.
That's a great analogy.
You're putting in so much energy, constantly moving, thinking, worrying, but ultimately, you get absolutely nowhere. You just end up feeling completely brained, totally exhausted, but no closer to figuring anything out or finding any peace of mind. And that's precisely what we want to unpack today. This common challenge, this kind of mental treadmill, it's something so many of us grapple with, day in, day out.
Definitely.
So we've gathered insights from licensed therapists, from cognitive behavioral specialists, psychiatrists too, to bring you not just the theory behind it, but, well, practical, really actionable skills.
Right, things you can actually use.
Exactly. Our mission here is really to help you quiet that overactive brain, maybe regain a sense of control over your thoughts, and ultimately find a bit more calm, more clarity in your everyday life.
So if you've ever felt trapped in that endless cycle of what ifs, or maybe that should I've said loop, constantly second-guessing yourself, or, dreading some imagined future disaster, please know you're absolutely not alone.
Far from it.
This discussion, we've crafted it just for you. It's all about giving you the tools, the strategies to start breaking free from those patterns. So let's get started on this.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's kick things off with a scenario. I think if you're someone who tends to overthink, this might feel, well, maybe eerily familiar. Picture this. You get an email from your boss.
Okay.
The subject line is kind of vague, maybe just meeting request or something. And the message itself offers zero explanation, nothing. It just says they want to meet with you in 2 days.
Just let's meet Friday at 10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
2 days notice, absolutely no context provided. Now, what happens inside your head?
Yeah.
Almost instantly.
Instantly. It's like your heart just drops into your stomach,
Yeah.
right? You feel this sickening kind of lurch, this sudden wave of anxiety just washes over you. Your mind doesn't really pause to consider neutral possibilities, like maybe it's about a new project or maybe they just need an update. No, it leaps straight to the most catastrophic conclusion available.
Yeah, the worst one.
What did I do wrong? You think, oh no, this has to be it. They're finally going to fire me. It's this immediate, often really irrational assumption. And it's fueled not by any actual facts, but by this powerful surge of fear and often a desperate need for control or certainty.
And from that exact moment, the internal drama really kicks into high gear. You spend the next 2 days, well, actually, it feels like every single waking moment, just obsessed.
Completely consumed.
Yeah, you start scrutinizing every single task you've completed recently, every email you sent last week, every conversation you had in the hallway. You're replaying these exchanges from weeks ago, maybe even months, dissecting every word, every glance, searching desperately for some clue, some tiny misstep that could possibly have led to this imagined impending doom. And sleep. forget about it. It becomes totally elusive. Your brain just refuses to quiet down. It's endlessly rehashing work scenarios, maybe old grievances you thought were buried, potential mistakes, just over and over and over again. You feel mentally exhausted before that meeting has even happened.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? During the day at work, your focus is just shattered. Even simple routine tasks suddenly feel monumentally difficult because your mind is constantly being pulled back, distracted by that swirling vortex of worry about what your boss is going to say.
Right. You can't concentrate.
You might even find yourself, subtly or maybe not so subtly, trying to probe your coworkers. Hey, did you hear anything? Does the boss seem okay today? Trying to gather any hints, any intel you can find.
Yeah, looking for clues everywhere.
And your friends or family, they might even start to get a bit tired of hearing your endless anxieties about this single unexplained meeting. It becomes this pervasive sense of dread that really starts to impact everything around you.
It's absolutely consuming. The tension just builds and builds, stretching those 2 days out until they feel like an absolute eternity. Finally, the time for the meeting arrives. You walk into the office, maybe your palms are sweating, each step feels heavy with dread. You might even feel physically unwell.
Nauseous even.
Exactly. Your boss looks up, maybe looks a bit stressed, perhaps a little tense themselves, which, of course, you interpret as confirmation of the worst. They gesture for you to take a seat. Take a seat.
And your heart sinks further.
Yeah. And then they explain. The manager who's currently above you, they're leaving the company, and your boss was wondering if you would be interested in stepping up, taking on the role.
Wow.
More responsibility, yes, but also a significant pay increase. Why? Because they've heard such positive things about your performance, your potential, and they genuinely believe you're the perfect fit for the job.
You're just ecstatic, right? That news just washes over you. It brings this immense, almost physical wave of relief.
Totally.
It's an incredible opportunity, a fantastic leap forward for your career, even if, okay, it means stepping into new territory, maybe needing some additional training down the line. You finally breathe out that huge sigh of relief you've been holding on to for like 48 solid hours.
All that agonizing worry, all that crippling anxiety, those sleepless nights, just like that, you realize they were for absolutely nothing. You thank your boss, maybe you manage a shaky smile, and you leave the office feeling utterly elated, on top of the world.
And here's the kicker, right? Here's where it often gets really interesting for someone who's prone to overthinking. And this is where the cycle can just instantly restart.
Yeah, tell me about it.
As you walk out of that office, that initial powerful rush of relief, it might very quickly start to give way to a completely new kind of obsession. Not about the good news itself, but about why you were such an idiot, quote unquote, to worry so much in the first place.
The self-criticism starts.
Exactly. What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
You might start thinking this wave of self-criticism just washing over you. And then almost without missing a single beat, your mind pivots again. It shifts that worry right onto the new job.
Oh, yeah. The new target.
Will I actually be good enough for this? Can I really handle this level of responsibility? What if I fail? What if they realize they made a mistake hiring me? And just like that, the endless lane of overthinking starts all over again, often just with a new focus. Does that whole sequence sound familiar to you listening? That feeling of relief just quickly morphing into a new form of worry, leaving you feeling kind of helpless to stop it.
That narrative, I think, just beautifully illustrates the core challenge we're discussing today.
Rare.
And it also leads us directly to a really crucial distinction. Understanding this can fundamentally change how you approach problems. It's about differentiating between overthinking and productive problem solving.
That's absolutely key. Overthinking, at its very essence, is when you find yourself caught in this excessive, really repetitive loop of thoughts about a problem or a situation, but, and this is the important part, without actually progressing towards any kind of viable solution. It really is that mental hamster wheel analogy you used earlier. You're spinning and spinning, seemingly working hard mentally, but you're not actually getting anywhere. And often, it just leads to more stress, not less.
So it's not about, like, constructively analyzing a situation or methodically working through different options. It sounds like it's more about perpetually hitting rewind on a conversation in your head.
Exactly.
Replaying it endlessly, dissecting every tiny detail, every vocal inflection, every glance someone gave you. Or maybe it involves imagining countless what-if scenarios, all in this often kind of futile attempt to avoid making future mistakes or trying desperately to control every single possible outcome. And the paradox seems to be that this kind of thinking, it rarely leads to any real clarity or resolution. Instead, it just leaves you feeling more anxious, more overwhelmed, or sometimes completely paralyzed with indecision.
Mm.
You feel mentally wiped out, totally exhausted, but you're no closer to actually solving whatever the initial issue was.
Precisely. Productive problem solving, on the other hand, in stark contrast, is a much more focused, structured, and importantly, goal-oriented approach. Its aim is crystal clear from the start. Find a solution and move forward with actionable steps.
Okay, so it has a direction.
Yes. Unlike overthinking, which is often driven purely by fear, anxiety, and this intolerance of uncertainty, problem solving is fundamentally about taking practical, deliberate steps toward reaching a resolution. It has a clear structure. A beginning, where you clearly define the actual problem. A middle, where you brainstorm and evaluate potential solutions. And an end, where you take action and then review the results.
Right.
The focus is always, always on forward momentum, on making progress, even if that progress is just incremental, one small step at a time. And when you engage in that, you feel a genuine sense of accomplishment, even from those small victories along the way.
Okay, so if you're listening right now and maybe wondering, how do I actually know if I'm stuck in that unproductive overthinking loop versus genuinely trying to solve a problem? What are some of the common signs we should be looking for in ourselves? How can we tell the difference?
That's a great question. There are a few key indicators you can watch out for. First, you find yourself replaying the exact same scenarios or concerns in your mind, just over and over and over again, without actually coming to a decision or a resolution, or even sometimes a clearer understanding. It really is like a broken record, just stuck on the same groove, playing the same few notes endlessly.
Okay, so repetition without progress. What else?
Second, and this is a particularly potent sign, after you've spent time thinking about a problem, you actually feel more stuck, more anxious, or significantly more mentally drained than when you started thinking about it.
Oh, that's interesting. So the thinking makes it worse?
Exactly. Productive thinking, even when it's about really difficult or complex issues, should ideally give you at least some sense of direction or clarity or a potential next step, even if the path forward is challenging. It shouldn't leave you feeling depleted and even more overwhelmed than before.
Right. And I guess a third sign would be related to where your thoughts are actually focused.
Yes, precisely. Your thoughts tend to focus overwhelmingly on those hypothetical what-ifs and those imaginative worst-case scenarios rather than on practical, actionable steps or concrete solutions.
Okay.
It becomes all about the potential pitfalls, the imagined disasters down the road, all the things that might possibly go wrong, instead of asking yourself practical questions like, okay, what can I actually do about this right now? Or what's the very next small step I can realistically take?
So if you notice those things, the repetition, feeling worse after thinking, focusing only on what ifs, that's a pretty good sign your thinking isn't moving forward.
Exactly. It's just looping back on itself, like that dog chasing its own tail. And this inevitably leads to profound frustration, a deep sense of helplessness, and often just sheer emotional exhaustion, which is, the complete opposite of what conscious thought is supposed to achieve for us.
It sounds incredibly exhausting, and anyone who's really experienced it knows it truly, truly is. Which brings us to a really fundamental question. Why? Why do our brains do this to us? What actually makes us fall into these relentless patterns of overthinking? Because honestly, it often feels like we're genuinely trying to be helpful to ourselves, trying to solve or prevent problems, yet it just seems to create more distress.
You've really hit on a core truth there. A major, absolutely pervasive driver of overthinking is, at its root, fear and uncertainty. Our brains, they're hardwired for survival. They're constantly scanning the environment, both internal and external, for potential threat.
Right, the survival instinct.
Exactly. So when we're faced with the unknown or with potential negative outcomes, that internal threat detection system just goes into overdrive. The fear of making the wrong decision, the fear of an unknown future outcome, or even, quite powerfully, the fear of what other people might think about our choices or our actions. All of these can trigger this cascade of excessive, often highly unproductive thinking. It's basically a desperate attempt by the mind to try and predict and control things that are fundamentally uncontrollable.
And this often leads to that phenomenon we sometimes call analysis paralysis, right? Where you become so utterly overwhelmed by all the possibilities, all the potential risks you've imagined, and all those multiplying what-if scenarios that you simply can't move, frozen.
Yeah, you end up doing nothing at all, even when taking some kind of action is desperately needed. It really is like standing at some incredibly complex crossroads with a million different signs pointing in every direction, and instead of just choosing a path, any path, you simply freeze up, completely unable to proceed. And the research in this area consistently shows that people who naturally have a lower tolerance for uncertainty often struggle with overthinking significantly more than others. For these individuals, not knowing an answer, not having a clear outcome defined, feels deeply, profoundly unsettling. It can feel almost intolerable.
Okay.
And this intolerance for uncertainty, it's often closely tied to a strong underlying psychological need for a very granular level of control over their circumstances, over outcomes. Some people are simply wired with a higher inherent need to feel in control of their environment and what happens next.
Whereas others find it easier to adapt.
Exactly. Others find it easier to kind of go with the flow, see what happens, adapt as they go. But the more you feel you must have that control, the more anxious you tend to become when faced with uncertainty. And paradoxically, the more likely you are to get caught in those endless what-if scenarios and those repetitive thought loops. The mind tries to control the uncontrollable by thinking about it excessively, but ultimately it's a completely futile exercise.
So it's this desperate, often totally counterproductive attempt to somehow gain certainty and control in a world that is, by its very nature, inherently uncertain.
Okay, so beyond just that core fear and uncertainty, what other kinds of emotional triggers can push us into this overthinking trap?
Oh, emotions play an incredibly significant role here. For instance, past mistakes can be really powerful catalysts. If you made an error before, maybe a significant misstep at work or a regrettable comment you made in an important relationship, you might find yourself overanalyzing current or similar situations in the future.
Right, trying not to repeat it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You scrutinize every minute detail, every potential variable in this almost obsessive attempt to avoid repeating that same mistake and feeling that same pain again. Similarly, if you have a strong tendency towards perfectionism,
Yes, perfectionism.
you might find yourself overthinking every single detail, every step of a process, trying to prevent any perceived chance of failure. Because for a perfectionist, anything less than absolutely perfect can feel fundamentally unacceptable, like a core failure. And I imagine self-doubt would just pour fuel on that fire too, wouldn't it? If you lack fundamental confidence in your own judgment, your own instincts, you'd probably constantly second-guess every decision you make, every gut feeling you have.
Absolutely. These powerful emotions, things like regret, fear of failure, pervasive self-doubt, they can truly cloud your judgment and keep you firmly stuck in that overthinking loop. It makes it incredibly hard to see things clearly, logically, or with any real sense of perspective. It really is like trying to look at the world through a distorted funhouse mirror. Everything just gets warped.
So how can we start to recognize when our emotions are driving the bus, so to speak, rather than logic?
Well, a really helpful way to recognize if your emotions are driving your thoughts rather than objective reality is to consciously pause. Just take a breath and ask yourself this crucial question. Am I thinking this way because it's logical, because it's fact-based, and because it actually moves me forward towards a solution? Or am I primarily responding to a past, maybe no longer relevant experience, or just a strong emotion like fear or self-doubt? This simple question, just asking it, helps create this critical space. It allows you a moment to separate that emotional reasoning, which is often automatic and reactive, from more objective, practical thought. It gives you a chance to choose a different path.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've clearly defined what overthinking is. We've explored some of the core reasons why it happens: fear, uncertainty, emotional triggers. Now, are there actually different kinds of overthinking? Or does it all pretty much manifest as the same basic mental loop for everyone?
That's an excellent and really insightful question, actually, because while the underlying mechanism, that repetitive, unproductive thought process, is quite similar, people definitely experience overthinking in distinct and recognizable ways. Research in clinical practice suggests there are at least four common types that people widely experience.
Okay, four types. What's the first one?
First, there's what we call rumination about the past. Now, this isn't just casually remembering a past event. It's getting trapped, truly stuck, in an endless, often agonizing loop of revisiting past regrets, mistakes you made, or difficult conversations you had.
It's like replaying that awkward comment you made at the party last week, dissecting every single should have and could have until it feels like a fresh wound all over again. You're constantly looking backward, often with intense regret or self-blame.
Okay, so stuck in the past. What's number two?
Second, we have worry about the future.
Mm.
This is essentially foresight gone haywire, turned into a recurring nightmare scenario generator. It involves obsessively imagining all the potential negative outcomes and those endless what-if scenarios that haven't even happened yet and, very likely may never happen at all.
Right, the catastrophizing.
Exactly. It's that constant mental rehearsal of how a presentation could go terribly wrong, or how a difficult conversation you need to have might completely explode into conflict. This type of overthinking is primarily driven by anxiety about the unknown and that deep-seated need for certainty we talked about earlier.
Okay, past and future covered. What's the third type? Third, there's overanalyzing decisions. This is where you get stuck in a profound state of indecision. You find yourself endlessly scrutinizing every tiny detail, weighing every minute pro and con, and considering every single potential consequence of making a choice, no matter how small or insignificant that choice might actually be. It becomes virtually impossible to move forward because the fear of making the wrong decision, the imperfect choice, is just completely paralyzing. You might spend hours agonizing over something as simple as what to eat for dinner, let alone making a major life or career choice.
Well, yeah, that sounds exhausting too. And the fourth type, I'm guessing this one has a strong social component based on your earlier example.
Absolutely, you nailed it.
No.
The fourth common type is social anxiety overthinking. And this is an incredibly common experience, even for people who don't consider themselves chronic overthinkers in other areas. It happens after a social interaction, could be a brief chat with a colleague, could be a lengthy party. Afterwards, you find yourself endlessly replaying the conversation in your head. You dissect every word you said, every glance you perceived, every laugh. You torture yourself with questions like, why on earth did I say that? Did I sound stupid? Do they think I'm weird now? What must they think of me? It's this relentless internal self-critique, and it's driven primarily by a fear of negative judgment from others and that very human desire to be liked, accepted, or seen in a positive light. Many people, even those who seem outwardly confident, can strongly relate to this specific form of overthinking.
It really truly feels like overthinking is this grand paradox, doesn't it? We engage in it often quite intensely because, well, we're afraid of failure. We're afraid of the unknown. We somehow hope that if we just think about it enough, if we analyze it from every possible angle, we can somehow solve the problems or control the outcomes.
That's the underlying belief.
But in reality, as we're seeing, overthinking doesn't actually protect us from failure or uncertainty at all. It actually tends to create new problems.
Yeah.
And it significantly amplifies those very fears we were trying to escape in the first place. It reminds me of that analogy you use trying to shield yourself from the rain with a colander instead of an umbrella.
Right.
The harder you try to catch every single drop, the wetter you inevitably get, and the more frustrated and exhausted you become in the process. True relief, true clarity, it often seems to come not from gripping tighter onto our thoughts, but actually from learning to let go a bit, from accepting that we simply can't control everything and that fundamentally that's okay. It's part of being human.
That's a really profound analogy, the colander, and it brings to mind another powerful image that therapists often use. Imagine you're holding a glass jar filled with muddy water. If you constantly shake that jar, vigorously trying to make the water clear, what happens? It just stays cloudy, right? It remains opaque and you can't see through it at all. But if you simply set the jar down on a table and let it rest patiently, without agitation, what happens then?
The dirt settles.
Exactly. The dirt, the sediment, it gradually settles down to the bottom and the water above it naturally becomes clear. Our minds often work in the exact same way. When we finally manage to stop that constant mental agitation, that relentless shaking of the jar through overthinking, we give our thoughts a chance to settle. And clarity, insight, peace, they often emerge precisely when we pause, when we allow ourselves that space to just be. But you're right, letting go isn't easy, especially in a world, in a culture that relentlessly values control, optimization, and achieving perfection in everything.
And that's before we even factor in today's world. In this hyper-connected digital age we live in, social media in particular adds significant fuel to this overthinking fire, doesn't it?
Oh, massively.
We're constantly scrolling through what are essentially highlight reels of other people's lives, these carefully curated images of success, perfect-looking vacations, gleaming achievements, flawless relationships, and inevitably, often unconsciously, we compare their polished, edited realities to our own messy, imperfect, day-to-day struggles.
The comparison trap.
Yeah, and you find yourself thinking things like, wow, they seem to be doing so much better than me. Why can't I figure things out? Why isn't my life as seemingly perfect as theirs? These constant comparisons, they create immense, often totally unnecessary pressure, and they can really push us much deeper into that overthinking trap, fostering feelings of self-doubt, inadequacy, and just feeling like we're falling behind.
It's absolutely true. Our minds are they're absolutely bombarded with information these days. It's relentless. Constant notifications pinging on our phones, an endless stream of emails demanding attention, and that never-ending feed of social media updates showcasing curated perfection. It's really no wonder that so many of us feel overwhelmed and struggle intensely to quiet our minds.
It's sensory overload.
Consider the story of, let's call her Rachel, a client who came to me just utterly exhausted by her overthinking patterns, especially at night. Every single night before bed, she found herself scrolling through her phone for hours.
Oh, the doom scrolling.
Exactly. Seeing a friend's recent promotion announced on LinkedIn, a celebrity's exotic vacation photos on Instagram, a fitness influencer's seemingly perfect workout routine and physique, it was all right there just laid out, practically begging to be compared to her own life, her own perceived shortcomings and struggles. By the time Rachel finally managed to put her phone down, often well past midnight, her mind would be absolutely racing. Am I doing enough with my career? Why does everyone else seem so effortlessly happy and together? Why am I struggling so much just to keep up?
And what Rachel, and I think so many of us often forget in those moments, is that social media only ever presents a tiny, meticulously polished fraction of the whole picture.
Exactly, it's the highlight reel.
Behind every seemingly perfect post is a real, complex human being with their own private struggles, their own insecurities, their own imperfections, just like us. It's absolutely not a full, honest representation of reality. Once Rachel, with some guidance and a lot of conscious effort, started setting very intentional boundaries for herself, like strictly limiting her screen time, especially in the hour or two before bed, and consciously redirecting her focus onto her own unique journey, her own values, her own small daily accomplishments, she noticed a profound and really significant change.
That's fantastic.
Her overthinking, particularly the comparative kind, began to genuinely fade. It was replaced by a much-needed, hard-won sense of contentment and inner peace. It really highlights just how profoundly these external factors, particularly our digital environment, can influence and dramatically exacerbate our internal mental loops.
It's a powerful example. So, okay, if we want to finally hop off that pervasive mental hamster wheel, the very first absolutely foundational skill we need to develop is simply this: noticing and naming. Now, this sounds deceptively simple, I know, but it is incredibly powerful, and it's the bedrock upon which all other strategies are built.
Right.
Overthinking, or rumination, as psychologists often call it, is frequently such a deeply ingrained habit. It becomes so automatic that most of the time we're completely unaware we're even doing it. It really is like breathing. It just happens, operating largely outside our conscious awareness until we make an effort to observe it.
That's such an insightful comparison. The very first step, then, it sounds like, is to actively cultivate that awareness, to get really, really good at identifying when you're actually caught in an overthinking spiral. And then as soon as you catch yourself doing it, the key is just to acknowledge it.
Just notice it.
Yeah. Maybe say it out loud,
Yeah.
either just quietly to yourself or perhaps even to a trusted friend or partner if they're around. Okay, hang on. I'm overthinking this right now. That simple verbalization, that act of naming the process, it creates this small but really significant separation between you, the observer, and the thought itself. You're essentially stepping back, observing the thought, becoming aware of its presence, rather than being completely consumed by it or automatically believing it as absolute truth. It truly is the first vital step towards regaining control.
And this act of externalizing it, even just mentally naming it, can be incredibly helpful. I remember a licensed therapist sharing an anecdote about a time she herself had a somewhat emotionally reactive moment in a stressful work meeting. Afterward, she felt this powerful, overwhelming urge to immediately text everyone involved with this lengthy, detailed apology, trying to smooth everything over. She was clearly caught in a classic overthinking spiral, analyzing her every word. A perceptive colleague, noticing her obvious distress, simply came over and gently pointed out, "Emma, let's call her Emma, you're overthinking it." And just hearing that simple external acknowledgement, that moment of someone else naming what was happening internally, helped her immediately separate herself from the intense distress she was feeling about the situation. It gave her that crucial pause she needed to step back and reconsider before acting impulsively.
That external perspective, or even just naming it internally, can be so valuable.
Yeah.
It gives you that crucial pause, that moment of breathing room. Another powerful way to get better at noticing is to start learning your personal triggers.
Know your
Yeah.
patterns.
Exactly. When are you most likely to start ruminating? Is it a specific time of day, maybe late at night, when the house is quiet and distractions fade away? Is it typically after a particularly challenging interaction at work? Or perhaps it's after a social situation when you're finally alone with your thoughts again. Try to predict it. If you know, for example, that 10 p.m. is usually your prime overthinking time, you can mentally prepare yourself to notice it when it starts creeping in then. And you can consciously choose in that moment to shift your focus to something more helpful, or even engage in an activity that actively prevents rumination, like reading or listening to calming music.
And if you're really struggling to catch yourself in the act, here's a really practical exercise you can try. Set an alarm on your phone, have it go off once every hour, maybe just for a week or even just for a few days to start.
Okay, like a mindfulness bell.
Kind of. When the alarm rings, just pause for a second and check in with yourself. Ask, have I been ruminating in the past hour? Roughly how much time have I spent overthinking just now? You might actually be quite surprised by what you discover when you start tracking it like this.
Yeah, I bet.
This kind of systematic tracking really helps build that crucial awareness muscle. And you'll likely find, as many people do, that overthinking often rushes in to fill a void. It tends to happen most often when your mind is otherwise idle, when you don't have anything else constructive or engaging to occupy your attention. It's almost like the brain's default setting for when it's unoccupied.
Okay, so step one is getting good at noticing, catching yourself in the act, maybe understanding your triggers. Once you've gotten better at noticing when you're actually caught in an overthinking loop, what's the next crucial step? Because awareness is undoubtedly step one, but just being aware doesn't stop it, right?
Right.
Taking action to actually redirect that mental energy must be step two.
Right.
That seems like where the real change begins.
Exactly right. Awareness is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own. Our second powerful strategy is all about setting limits. It's learning to postpone or schedule your rumination. Now, I know this might sound completely counterintuitive, maybe even impossible, to someone who feels constantly plagued by uncontrollable, intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, like how can I schedule worry?
Right. But it is remarkably effective, and it's a technique that's widely used and validated in cognitive behavioral therapy. You quite literally learn to tell your brain, okay, I hear you, I acknowledge this worry, but I'm going to deal with this thought later, or more specifically, I'll worry about this at 3 p.m. today during my scheduled worry time. You can even physically put it on your calendar.
Okay.
3:00 p.m., worry about X.
Wow, actually schedule it.
Absolutely. This sends a clear, firm message to your brain. You are not simply ignoring or avoiding the issue forever. You are consciously choosing to reschedule it. And your brain, surprisingly, often cooperates because it receives the message that the thought will eventually be addressed. This significantly reduces the immediate nagging, the constant mental intrusion, because the brain trusts it has an appointment.
This sounds incredibly powerful, actually. And it must teach you over time that you actually have far more influence over your worries, over when and how you engage with them, than you might have previously believed. If you're just starting out trying this technique, what's a good way to practice?
Yeah, if you're new to this, a really effective practice is to actually schedule a specific worry time every single day, maybe for about a month initially, to really build the habit. For instance, you might decide, okay, every day at 2 p.m., I will dedicate exactly 20 minutes, set a timer, to my worries. During that specific 20-minute window, I will actively allow myself to engage with them. I can think about them, write about them, whatever feels right. But then, crucially, when that timer goes off, I will consciously, deliberately shift my focus back to what's important to me for the rest of the day.
Okay.
This consistent practice, doing it every day, shows your brain you are absolutely serious about setting these boundaries and taking back control over your mental space.
And during that scheduled worry time, what should you actually do? Just sit there and worry.
That leads perfectly to another really helpful piece of advice. There's a saying that many therapists share with their clients, one I really resonate with personally: never worry just in your head. If you're going to worry, do it on paper, write it down.
Get it out.
Exactly. Get it out of the swirl inside your skull and onto something tangible. And there are so many different constructive ways you can do this during your scheduled worry time. You could do a free write where you just let all your thoughts, worries, and anxieties spill onto the page without any judgment, no filters, just a stream of consciousness.
Okay.
You could engage in something called a locus of control activity. This is an exercise specifically designed to help you discern where you perceive the power lies in a given situation. Do you feel you control the outcome, an internal locus of control, or do you feel external forces or other people control it, an external locus of control? For people who overthink, understanding this distinction is often a game changer, as it allows you to clearly separate what you can realistically influence from the vast sea of things you absolutely cannot.
That sounds useful. What else?
Well, a classic pros and cons list can work wonders if you're stuck overanalyzing a specific decision. Or you could simply do a brain dump, where you just list out absolutely everything that's swirling around in your mind, all the worries, big and small, just to get them out and see them written down. When you schedule that worry time and you get those worries out onto paper, it creates these clear, tangible boundaries for your brain. And believe it or not, your brain actually thrives on structure and boundaries. It learns through repetition that there's a dedicated time and place for worry, which, paradoxically, allows it to more easily release its grip during all the other times, the designated non worry times.
That makes so much sense. Containment is key. Okay, so once we've started cultivating that awareness, noticing and naming, we've begun setting those vital limits around our worry, scheduling it, getting it on paper. It feels like the next logical step is to move into the active redirection of our thoughts when they pop up outside of that scheduled time.
Exactly. This brings us to our third crucial strategy, which is known as attention shifting, or sometimes more formally in therapeutic circles as cognitive diffusion. Our brains, as we well know by now, are these extraordinary nonstop thought-generating machines. They're constantly cranking out hundreds, maybe even thousands of thoughts every single hour of the day. But here's the critical point, and it's a truly liberating one once you grasp it. You do not have to believe everything you think.
That feels like a revolutionary idea for someone stuck in overthinking.
It really is. Just because a thought is loud or frequent or feels incredibly intense and urgent, it doesn't automatically mean it's true or accurate or even helpful to pay attention to. There's a deeper part of you, sometimes called the observing self, a part of your consciousness that is inherently separate from the stream of your thoughts. You are, in essence, the observer, or maybe the referee, standing in the arena of your own mind. Cognitive diffusion is the skill of learning to create that vital separation. It's not really about getting rid of unwanted thoughts because, as we know, that's often impossible and usually counterproductive, like trying not to think of that pink elephant.
Right, it just makes you think of it more.
Exactly. Instead, cognitive diffusion is about fundamentally changing your relationship to your thoughts. You learn to observe them, almost like watching clouds passing in the sky. You acknowledge their presence. Ah, there's that worry thought again, without getting fused with them, without automatically believing them as gospel truth and getting carried away by their emotional current. When you can start to do that, even just for brief moments, you gain the power to consciously choose which thoughts you'll buy into, which ones you'll engage with, and which ones you'll simply allow to pass by without grabbing onto them. This is definitely a skill, like learning any new ability, and it absolutely gets easier and more automatic with consistent practice.
I really love that imagery, the idea of being the observer of the clouds, not the cloud itself, not the storm. As you get better at just noticing your thoughts without immediately reacting, it sounds like it could be incredibly helpful to visualize shifting your focus as like changing the channel on a remote control for your mind.
That's a perfect metaphor. Yes.
Imagine you're holding this mental remote control. When a negative, unproductive, or repetitive thought pops up on the screen of your mind, you can consciously choose to click the channel button. You shift what you're focused on. So instead of getting completely sucked into that compulsive worry about, say, a perceived flaw or a past mistake, channel worry, you might consciously click the remote and shift your mental channel to thinking about something you're genuinely grateful for in that exact moment, channel gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps you shift from obsessing about all the things related to a situation that you absolutely cannot control, channel helplessness, to focusing deliberately and specifically on the one or two things you can actually control or influence right now, channel action.
And when we talk about changing the channel in this way, using that remote control metaphor, we're typically referring to switching your attention to thoughts or activities that are really specific, that are clearly within your personal locus of control, things you can actually do something about, and crucially, that are action-oriented or at least present moment focused.
Okay.
For example, instead of endlessly worrying about some big future event that you can't really influence right now, you might shift your attention to planning the very next concrete small step you can take towards preparing for it right here, right now. These alternative channels tend to be much more helpful, much more productive uses of your valuable mental energy than just sitting there spinning your mental wheels in the mud of abstract overthinking. It's all about being deliberate and purposeful with where you choose to direct your attention, guiding it towards channels that serve you best rather than letting the negative channels play on repeat.
That's a really powerful distinction, choosing the channel. Now that you've learned to catch yourself when you're overthinking, skill one, maybe schedule time for it, skill two, and practice watching those thoughts instead of getting completely sucked into them. Skill 3, diffusion. Let's explore some really practical ways to actually shift your thinking to something more helpful in the moment. Because, as the old saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. If you don't choose, the old habits rush back in.
Exactly. If you're just trying to stop overthinking, or if you aren't actively, consciously choosing where to put your focus instead, your mind will almost inevitably fall back into that well-worn, familiar habit of rumination. It's the path of least resistance for the brain. So we need to actively fill that mental space with something constructive and immediate.
And arguably the most accessible, universally available antidote to an overactive mind spinning off into the past or future is the present moment. The strategy here, our fourth skill, is to consciously, intentionally turn your attention away from your inner world of negative, repetitive thinking, away from those internal narratives, worries, and replays, and deliberately redirect it fully toward the outer world, toward your immediate present reality.
Okay, so getting out of your head.
Precisely. This includes focusing on the people you might be physically with right now, the specific activities you're currently engaged in, or even just the immediate physical environment surrounding you. The act of doing this literally pulls you out of the abstract realm of your head and anchors you firmly back into your actual life, happening right here, right now.
It's a wonderful analogy, I think, to think of your inner world, your thoughts and worries, as maybe looking at the smudges on a window pane.
I like that.
It's so easy to get really focused on those imperfections, right? Those mental blemishes, those smudges. But if you intentionally shift your focus, lift your gaze to what's happening beyond the window pane, to what's unfolding outside in the world, you suddenly realize that even if a thought exists, even if there are smudges on the glass, there's a vibrant, real world unfolding right here, right now, completely independent of that internal mental chatter. You can choose where to focus your gaze.
Beautifully put. So in any given moment, especially when you notice that overthinking starting to creep in, I'd really encourage you to actively engage your senses as an anchor. Ask yourself, what can I physically see right here, right now? Notice colors, shapes, movement. What can I physically feel in my body at this very second? Maybe the texture of your clothes against your skin, the temperature of the air on your face, the solid feeling of the chair beneath you.
Okay, really tuning in.
Yeah. Can you notice yourself breathing? Can you feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest or abdomen with each breath without needing to change it, just observing it? These seemingly simple questions and sensory observations are incredibly powerful because they pull you directly out of the abstract realm of your mind and anchor you firmly into the concrete reality of your body and your present environment. They yank you away from those repetitive, often unhelpful, ruminative thoughts. Now, I'll be honest, it's a skill, and it can be challenging at first, especially when you're feeling really stressed or overwhelmed by a big problem. But you absolutely can learn to consciously shift your attention in this way. And the more you practice these present moment anchors, the easier and more automatic it becomes. It's genuinely like building a new mental muscle through repetition.
And speaking of practice, a truly effective and very practical mindfulness exercise that you can try absolutely anywhere, especially when you feel that overthinking starting to creep in or take hold, is the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. It's brilliant because it's so structured and quickly interrupts that overthinking loop.
Ah, yes, they 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Very effective.
Yeah. You start by consciously acknowledging, or maybe even naming out loud, 5 distinct things you can see around you right now. Just look around and identify 5 things. Then you shift to identifying 4 things you can physically touch or feel. Maybe your sleeve, the table, your own skin, the floor under your feet.
Okay.
Next, you listen carefully and identify 3 distinct things you can hear. Could be birds outside, the hum of a computer, distant traffic. Followed by identifying 2 things you can smell. Maybe coffee brewing, cut grass, soap on your hands. And finally, you focus on 1 thing you can taste. Perhaps the lingering taste of toothpaste, or maybe you take a sip of water and notice that sensation. This whole exercise forces your brain to actively engage with your immediate sensory environment. It anchors you firmly back in the present moment, the here and now, where you actually have far more agency, far more control over your thoughts and your actions than you do when you're lost in the past or the future.
That's a fantastic concrete tool. And another really simple, accessible grounding exercise is just to pick a color, any color, say blue, and then consciously scan the room or your environment and mentally name or acknowledge all the objects you can see that have that specific color.
Okay, like an I Spy for grown-ups.
Exactly. These kinds of exercises are so effective because they actively engage your senses and require you to focus on your immediate external environment. This makes it much, much harder for your mind to simultaneously wander back into that abstract, often unhelpful world of internal worries, replays, and what-ifs. They literally disrupt the overthinking pattern in its tracks and bring you forcefully back to the present, giving you that vital chance to reset, take a breath, and then consciously redirect your mental energy towards something more constructive.
That focus on the concrete versus the abstract feels like a really natural progression to our next powerful strategy. This one is about learning to actively shift from abstract thinking to concrete thinking.
Mhm.
We all instinctively know what that abstract or vague thinking sounds like, right? It's those sweeping, often negative overgeneralizations that offer absolutely no real entry point for taking action.
Too big, too fuzzy.
Yeah. Things like, why can't I ever seem to get my needs met in relationships? Or why can't I just be happy like all my friends seem to be? Or why is everything in my life always so hard? It's often phrased almost like a universal, inescapable truth about your entire life or your core being.
And this kind of thinking, while it feels like you're grappling with really profound, important problems, almost always leads directly to a profound sense of self-loathing, overwhelm, and ultimately helplessness. Why? Because the problem, as stated, is simply too vast, too undefined, too nebulous to ever find a real actionable solution for. It's like trying to boil the ocean.
Right. Impossible task.
So instead of getting completely lost in these sweeping, vague, unanswerable problems, the trick is to intentionally, consciously narrow your focus. Bring it down to just one or two concrete, specific details, small, tangible things that you can actually act on, things that are clearly within your immediate sphere of influence right now.
And this brings us back to something you touched on earlier, which feels truly crucial here. It means learning to ask yourself the right kind of questions. Because the questions we ask ourselves internally really shape our reality.
Absolutely fundamental. Here's a really good rule of thumb to remember. Why questions, especially when directed at yourself or a negative situation, almost always lead directly into a downward cycle of rumination and get you hopelessly stuck in an unproductive loop.
Why is the danger zone?
It often is. Think about the common culprits. Why am I such a failure? Why are people sometimes so hateful? Why am I feeling so depressed right now? Why do I overthink everything so much? What's fundamentally the matter with me? The basic problem with all of these kinds of questions is that not a single one of them actually leads towards taking action, making progress, or finding a constructive solution. They just invite more self-criticism, more endless internal debate, more justification for feeling bad, and ultimately deeper despair.
It's like digging the hole deeper.
Exactly. This pattern is so common. I even had a client once who, with a wonderful touch of self-aware humor, decided that the word why was now officially a swear word in his personal vocabulary.
I like that.
Every time he caught himself internally asking a why question directed at himself or his problems, he had to, metaphorically, or sometimes literally, put money in a small swear jar. His wife, bless her, became his accountability partner in this and would gently call him out on it when she heard him doing it. He quickly realized just how habitually he used why in the self-defeating, ruminative way. It forced him to catch himself and consciously shift his internal questioning.
So what did he shift to instead of why?
So instead of asking, why me? Why do I always have to deal with this depression? Which just led to feeling victimized and helpless. He started training himself to ask, okay, acknowledging I feel depressed right now, what is one small, concrete thing I can actually do today, right now, for my mental health?
The action focus.
Exactly. And often that simple shift in questioning led him to go for a brisk walk outside, or read a chapter of an engaging book, or make a call to connect with a supportive friend, all of which were infinitely more helpful and empowering for him than just sitting there pondering the intractable, unanswerable why of his depression.
That's such a clear, really powerful example of the truly transformative impact that simply rephrasing an internal question can have. It literally shifts the entire internal landscape from one of judgment, resignation, and helplessness to one of possibility, agency, and action. It's amazing.
It really is. So instead of that broad, self-defeating internal monologue like, why can't I ever seem to succeed at relationships, which offers absolutely no practical path forward, you could practice asking yourself, okay, acknowledging relationships feel hard right now. What is one specific relationship skill, maybe active listening, or setting boundaries that I can actively work on practicing this week? That's a specific, actionable question. It leads directly to potential progress, not paralysis. It's always far more practical and ultimately more hopeful to identify and work on taking one small, concrete step forward than it is to constantly wallow in a general, abstract sense of being a failure at relationships. Okay. Concrete over abstract. That makes perfect sense. Building on that theme of purposeful action and finding direction, our next strategy is about understanding and consciously shifting to your values.
Yes, this is a really important one.
It seems crucial to grasp that simply focusing intensely on the overthinking itself or obsessing about how to stop overthinking often won't actually make it stop. In fact, it can sometimes make it worse.
That's absolutely right. When it comes to our internal experiences, like thoughts and feelings, trying to actively suppress them or eliminate them often backfires spectacularly. It's like that proverbial pink elephant we mentioned. If I tell you whatever you do, do not think about a pink elephant, what's the very first image that pops into your mind?
A pink elephant. Every time.
Exactly. So active suppression, trying to force thoughts away, is rarely the most effective answer when it comes to managing difficult internal experiences like overthinking.
Okay, so if trying to suppress those thoughts or simply make them go away doesn't really work, what's the more effective alternative? What should we be shifting towards instead?
Well, before we can truly begin to change deeply ingrained patterns like overthinking, we first need to get clear on what we do want more of in our life. What are we trying to make space for? What are we actually shifting towards? What will ultimately fill the space that overthinking currently occupies in our mind and our time?
Right. Replace the negative with something positive.
Sort of. So instead of just aimlessly distracting yourself, which, as we'll discuss in more detail shortly, can definitely be a double-edged sword, the goal here is to intentionally, consciously shift your attention and your energy towards activities and ways of being that align with what you genuinely care about, with what truly matters to you at your core. What are your values? This approach, which is deeply rooted in therapeutic modalities like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, allows you to essentially retrain your brain to use its immense energy in a helpful, purposeful, and ultimately more fulfilling way, guided by your deepest aspirations and what you want your life to stand for.
So this might mean, for example, consciously choosing, in a moment where you feel pulled towards worry, to instead be more present and engaged with your children.
Yeah.
Or maybe choosing to practice genuine relaxation without the constant background hum of guilt or mental agitation, or perhaps taking helpful, purposeful action towards a meaningful personal or professional goal, even if it feels scary.
Exactly. Or simply focusing on living a more meaningful, engaged life in general, whatever that looks like for you. So if you want to shift away from chronic overthinking, a really powerful question to start asking yourself is, what is most important to me right now in this particular phase of my life? What do I truly want my life to be about? What are the core values like kindness, courage, connection, creativity, learning that I want to embody more fully?
And how does clarifying values help with the overthinking itself?
Well, overthinking often leads to withdrawal and isolation, doesn't it? You become increasingly caught in the labyrinth of your own head, and as a result, you tend to disconnect from the outside world, from activities you enjoy, and from the people you care about. So a crucial part of this skill is to consciously work on reversing that tendency, even if it's just taking one small incremental step at a time in a value direction. Actively exploring your values, really identifying what truly drives you, what makes life feel worthwhile for you, what kind of person you aspire to be in your relationships, your work, your community, gives your mind a powerful, positive new direction to focus on. It provides something constructive and intrinsically motivating to replace those negative self-defeating loops. It essentially gives you a compass to guide your actions, moving you towards what matters instead of just away from what feels bad.
That's a really inspiring way to think about it, moving towards values. Okay, building beautifully on that theme of purposeful action, and also linking back to the idea of creating clear boundaries, our next strategy is quite practical. It's about setting specific time limits on your thinking for particular problems.
Yes, this is an incredibly effective way to explicitly shift gears from that unproductive, endless spiral of overthinking into genuine, focused, time-bound problem solving. It's all about structuring your mental engagement intentionally.
So how does it work in practice?
The approach is actually quite simple, yet highly effective. You give yourself a dedicated, clearly contained block of time, let's say maybe 15 or 20 minutes, not much longer, to specifically brainstorm potential solutions or next steps for a particular problem you're currently grappling with. During this designated time, you commit to being intensely focused on that problem only.
Okay, focus brainstorming.
Exactly. Then once the timer you've set goes off, that's it. You consciously, deliberately stop the focused thinking on that problem. You transition out of thinking mode and into action mode. Now, that action might be taking the very first small step you identified during your brainstorm. Or it might simply be deciding to consciously table the problem for now, perhaps making a note to revisit it in another scheduled, timed session later. This approach works because it sets a clear, non-negotiable boundary around your thinking time for that specific issue, preventing it from drifting off into that familiar, endless, unproductive spiral of overthinking.
It sounds like it powerfully encourages decisiveness too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you know you only have a limited, focused window of time, you're probably far more likely to hone in on the truly important, actionable aspects of a problem. You're less likely to get bogged down in irrelevant details, minor what-ifs, or those tangential worries that often derail problem solving.
That's absolutely the effect. You become much more efficient and strategic with your valuable mental energy because you know the clock is ticking.
But what about the common fear? What if I don't actually come up with a perfect solution in that 15 or 20 minutes? People might feel pressure.
That's a very valid concern, and it comes up a lot. The answer is that's perfectly fine. In fact, it's often expected, especially with complex problems. The primary goal of this timed session isn't necessarily to achieve immediate perfection or find the grand, ultimate resolution right then and there.
Okay, so what is the goal then?
The key goals are twofold. First, to make some kind of forward progress in your thinking, even if it's just clarifying the problem better or identifying one possible next step. And second, to contain the thinking process itself, preventing it from bleeding into the rest of your day. So if the timer goes off and you don't have the answer, you simply make a brief note of where you left off in your thinking, or maybe jot down any possibilities you considered, no matter how imperfect they seem. Then, and this is crucial, you consciously give yourself a mental break. You step away from the problem, shift your focus elsewhere, and perhaps return to it fresh in another scheduled timed session later if it's still needed. This approach respects your brain's natural need for processing time and recovery, prevents mental burnout, while still keeping the problem on your radar in a structured, manageable, and contained way.
That's incredibly smart. It's about containment, conscious effort, and respecting mental limits. Okay, now let's talk about our next strategy, which feels very related to cognitive diffusion and challenging assumptions. It's about actively challenging your thoughts with questions. Overthinking, as we've discussed repeatedly throughout this conversation, is so often driven by unexamined assumptions, cognitive distortions, and deeply ingrained fears, rather than by solid objective facts or evidence. Our thoughts are often just interpretations, sometimes faulty ones, not immutable truths cast in stone.
Exactly right. Your thoughts are not facts. So you need to cultivate the skill of becoming your own internal debater, your own gentle but firm critical investigator when it comes to your own thinking. When an overthinking thought arises, especially one that feels particularly alarming or keeps repeating insistently or is harshly self-critical, you need to learn to actively pause and ask yourself some direct, probing questions.
Okay, like what kind of questions?
Questions like, okay, wait a minute. What's the absolute worst thing that could realistically happen here? Not the most catastrophic thing I can imagine in my wildest fears, but the worst realistic, probable outcome. Another powerful one. Is this particular thought truly based on solid evidence and objective reality right now? Or am I mostly assuming a negative consequence based purely on my own fears, maybe past negative experiences or my current anxieties? And perhaps most crucially, okay, given this situation, what specifically is actually within my control right now in this very moment? What concrete action, however small, can I take about this?
Those questions feel incredibly powerful because they act like mental breaks, don't they? They force you to stop the runaway train of fearful speculation and ground yourself back in reality, back in the present.
Precisely. They compel you to shift your focus away from that often paralyzing, fear-based, speculative thinking and towards practical, evidence-based action, or at least towards a more realistic assessment of the situation. These kinds of challenging questions are absolutely central to cognitive restructuring, which is a core technique used in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. They help you rigorously separate that often misleading emotional reasoning where feelings dictate thoughts. I feel anxious, therefore something bad must be about to happen, from more logical, evidence-based reasoning. This separation ultimately leads to more rational perspectives and more constructive decisions. You're essentially putting your most troublesome thoughts on trial, respectfully demanding concrete evidence before you automatically accept them as the absolute truth.
Putting thoughts on trial. I like that image. Okay, we're nearing the end of our list of practical skills. Our ninth skill, and it feels like a beautifully simple yet profoundly effective one, is practicing gratitude.
Ah, gratitude. Yes, it's a powerful, almost alchemical tool, I find, for interrupting and fundamentally beginning to break the cycle of negative overthinking. It worked by actively redirecting your brain's natural spotlight, its focus of attention.
I'm a very strong believer in the power of this one, too. And the scientific research increasingly backs it up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The practice itself can be incredibly simple. At the end of each day, perhaps before you go to sleep, just make it a consistent practice to write down, actually write, not just think 3 specific things you're genuinely grateful for from that particular day.
Mm-hmm. The writing helps solidify it.
Exactly. And they absolutely don't have to be huge, grand, life-changing events. It could be something as simple as the warmth of the sun on your face during your lunch break, a really delicious cup of coffee you enjoyed, a kind word someone offered you, or just a quiet moment of unexpected peace amidst a busy day. The key is consistency, doing it regularly.
And the act of consciously, deliberately focusing on gratitude fundamentally shifts your brain's default focus, which for many overthinkers tends to be negative or threat-oriented. Instead of habitually obsessing about what's wrong in your life, what's missing, or what you're currently worried about, you actively train your mind to seek out, notice, and appreciate what's right, what's good, and what you already have.
It retrains the focus.
Precisely. And this isn't just positive thinking in some superficial Pollyannish sense. Research in positive psychology and even neuroscience is showing that consistent gratitude practice can literally begin to rewire neural pathways over time. It appears to strengthen connections in brain regions associated with positive emotions, reward processing, moral cognition, and social bonding. Essentially, practicing gratitude makes it neurologically harder for those old, negative, ruminative thought loops to fire as intensely or frequently. It's an active brain training exercise that helps cultivate a more positive, balanced, and resilient mental landscape over time.
Wow, rewiring the brain. That's incredible.
Mm.
Okay, so we've explored a really comprehensive array of practical strategies and skills to help manage overthinking. But before we wrap up, it feels important to touch on a couple of important nuances and maybe some next steps for truly continuing this journey effectively. For instance, you mentioned distraction earlier and how it can be a double-edged sword. It often feels like such a quick fix to overthinking, right? Readily available escape hatch. But is it always helpful, or can it actually be detrimental in the long run?
That's a crucial point to clarify, because yes, distraction is definitely a double-edged sword when it comes to managing overthinking. On one hand, distraction absolutely can provide temporary relief. It can effectively stop overthinking in its tracks, particularly if you find yourself caught in a really intense, unproductive, painful mental rut. Consciously shifting your attention to an engaging activity like watching a movie, listening to music, doing a puzzle can be a valid short-term technique to interrupt a spiraling thought pattern and create some much-needed mental breathing room.
Okay, so short-term relief is possible, but what's the downside?
However, and this is the vital caveat, relying on distraction as your primary or only coping mechanism can very easily lead to chronic avoidance. And avoidance, in the long run, tends to make underlying problems worse, not better. If you're constantly using distraction to numb out or escape difficult thoughts and feelings, you're not actually addressing the root causes of your overthinking, nor are you developing genuine problem-solving skills or emotional resilience.
And we've probably all been there at some point. Endlessly binge-watching Netflix series, scrolling mindlessly through TikTok for hours on end, or maybe zoning out playing video games until late at night. While these activities might temporarily pause the overthinking, they don't actually solve anything fundamentally.
Right. The problem is still there when you stop distracting.
Exactly. In fact, if passive distraction becomes your go-to coping strategy, your life can slowly but surely start to lose its richness, its meaning, its purpose, and its joy. Precisely because you're consistently avoiding genuine engagement with what truly matters to you, your values, your goals, your relationships, and tackling real-world problems in a constructive way.
Precisely. The key here is learning to discern between healthy, intentional, temporary distraction used strategically and chronic passive avoidance used habitually. Use distraction consciously as a short-term break to interrupt a particularly painful or stuck thought loop, but don't let it become your default way of life or take over actually living the rich, meaningful life you value. Ultimately, you still need to find ways to face your problems directly when it's appropriate, perhaps using the structured problem-solving techniques we discussed, and then crucially, intentionally spend your time and energy doing something else that you actively care about, something that genuinely engages you and aligns with your values like gardening, exercising, pursuing a creative hobby, connecting deeply with loved ones, or learning a new skill. It's really about finding that balance,
Yeah.
using strategic temporary breaks when needed, followed by purposeful action and meaningful engagement with your life.
That's a really important distinction. Strategic break versus chronic avoidance. And finally, perhaps the most important point for some listeners. When should you seriously consider seeking professional help if overthinking feels truly overwhelming, persistent, and just unmanageable to tackle on your own, even with these strategies?
This is absolutely crucial. If overthinking is significantly, consistently interfering with your daily life, maybe it's impacting your important relationships, affecting your performance at work or school, disrupting your ability to sleep soundly night after night, or just generally eroding your overall sense of well-being, happiness, and joy, please know that it is an absolutely awesome, brave, and incredibly wise step to seek professional help.
It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. Therapy can be profoundly beneficial in these cases, providing customized support, deeper insight, and accountability that self-help strategies alone cannot always offer, especially when the overthinking is rooted in deeper issues like anxiety disorders, depression, or past trauma.
So for listeners who might be considering that step, what kinds of specific therapeutic approaches do licensed therapists typically use to help people struggling with severe overthinking?
Professionals can employ various highly effective, evidence-based therapeutic approaches, and they'll tailor the approach to your specific needs and the particular nature of your overthinking patterns. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is widely recognized and highly effective for addressing both rumination, past-focused overthinking, and worry, future-focused overthinking. CBT helps you learn to identify and directly challenge those negative, distorted, unhelpful thought patterns and systematically develop more balanced, realistic, and adaptive ones.
Okay, CBT is a common one. What else?
Then there's acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. ACT is excellent at teaching those skills of cognitive diffusion. We talked about learning to separate yourself from your thoughts, to observe them without judgment. ACT also strongly emphasizes helping you clarify your personal values and then take committed, concrete action towards living those values, even when difficult thoughts and feelings are present. It's less about changing the thoughts and more about changing your relationship to them and focusing on action.
Interesting. Any others?
And there's also a related approach called metacognitive therapy, MCT, which specifically focuses on changing your beliefs about thinking itself. For instance, it addresses underlying beliefs that excessive worry is somehow helpful or necessary for preventing problems, or beliefs that you have no control over your thoughts. By changing these meta-beliefs, MCT aims to reduce the tendency to engage in prolonged rumination and worry. Therapy, whichever the approach, provides a structured, supportive, and crucially non-judgmental environment to develop these vital skills, explore underlying issues safely, and receive personalized guidance. And thankfully, accessing a licensed, qualified therapist is easier than ever before through various online platforms, employee assistance programs, and traditional in-person options. There is help available. So wow, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? Just to recap the main points, we established that overthinking is essentially that persistent, unproductive loop of worry, doubt, and mental replaying. It's distinctly different from productive problem solving, which is always a constructive, forward-moving process aimed at finding solutions. We explored some of its core drivers, like that deeply rooted fear of uncertainty, the intolerance of ambiguity, and those powerful emotional triggers like past mistakes or perfectionism. And we also identified its common types, ranging from ruminating endlessly on past regrets to anxieties about social interactions or future unknowns.
But most importantly, I think, we've unpacked a really powerful toolkit of practical skills that you, listening right now, can begin practicing and using today. Starting with that foundational step of simply noticing and naming your overthinking as it happens in the moment. Then moving to more strategic moves like scheduling dedicated worry time to contain it effectively. We also covered actively shifting your attention away from those negative thought loops, using techniques like cognitive diffusion, seeing thoughts as just thoughts, not facts, and grounding yourself firmly in the present moment, using your senses when your mind starts to spiral.
We then discussed the importance of making your thinking concrete and specific instead of getting lost in vague, abstract worries. We talked about the profound power of connecting with and acting on your core values as a guiding compass. We covered setting practical time limits on your thinking sessions to encourage focus and prevent drift.
And also, rigorously challenging those unhelpful, often distorted thoughts with clear, probing, reality-checking questions. And finally, weaving in the simple but transformative daily habit of practicing gratitude to shift your brain's focus.
It's crucial to remember, though, that the ultimate goal here isn't to somehow completely stop thinking altogether. That's both impossible and, frankly, undesirable. Our minds are naturally designed to think, to plan, to analyze, to learn from the past and anticipate the future. The real goal is to learn how to direct your thoughts more purposefully, more consciously, in a way that leads you towards real solutions, towards clearer decisions, and ultimately towards a calmer, more peaceful, and more engaged state of mind. This is definitely a gradual process. It's much like learning to patiently untangle a very complex knot, working on one strand at a time, requiring both patience and persistence.
Life, let's face it, will always have its share of unpredictable winds, unexpected storms, and inherent uncertainties. It's a bit like a child first learning to fly a kite, constantly adjusting to the shifting breeze, or maybe like a surfer learning to ride the vast, ever-changing waves of the ocean. You can't control the wind or the waves entirely.
No, you can't.
But overthinking doesn't have to control us or dictate our entire experience of life. Learning to let go, in this context, isn't about ignoring your problems or becoming passive or complacent. It's much more about developing trust in yourself, trusting your ability to face challenges with clarity and courage as they arise, without needing to be consumed by endless unproductive worry beforehand. It's about acknowledging the presence of those waves of thought, understanding that they are often temporary, like weather patterns, and consciously choosing how you want to respond and how you want to navigate them with skill and grace.
So, perhaps as a final reflection for you listening today, take just a moment to consider this for yourself. What specific thoughts or worries have you perhaps been holding on to just a little too tightly recently, shaking that internal jar of muddy water relentlessly? What might genuinely happen if you simply allowed those thoughts to rest for a while, just like letting the muddy water in a jar settle naturally? Could you begin to cultivate a little more trust in yourself, trusting your inherent ability to handle the waves of life as they come without feeling like you need to have all the answers right away or needing to control every single potential outcome before you can feel okay?
Because it's so important to remember this. Overthinking isn't who you fundamentally are. It's not your identity. It's simply something you do. It's a mental habit. And like any habit, with consistent practice, patience, self-compassion, and the mindful application of these powerful skills we've discussed today, it is absolutely something you can learn to manage, reduce, and perhaps even overcome, opening up so much more space for a more vibrant, present, and truly meaningful life.
That truly wraps up our exploration of overthinking for today. We sincerely hope that you found these insights and these practical tips genuinely helpful and that they provide a clear, empowering path forward for you if this is something you struggle with. Thank you so much for joining us here on Fluent Podcasts.
Yes, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this in-depth discussion and found it valuable, please be sure to keep listening to our other explorations, and most importantly, keep practicing these techniques in your own life. Remember, progress takes time and consistent, conscious effort. There will be good days and bad days, but we're here every week, aiming to guide you on your journey toward better English, yes, but also towards a calmer mind and a more fulfilling life. Until next time, take a deep breath, trust yourself, and keep making those leaps forward.
Happy learning, everyone.